morning. Good morning, everyone. Thanks. Whoa. Wow, I like that response at 9 o'clock. Thank you for joining us first thing in the morning, sitting on the log. My name is Ryan Ford. I'm Director of Milestone Reunions here at Williams and have the good fortune of working with the 50th reunion class. I think we have quite a few people who are going to be going through or have gone through the 50th reunion. So what does it mean to be on the log? I imagine you all have some version of what that means to you, stemming from your experiences here in Williamstown and perhaps from other points in your life when you've been sitting on the log. James Garfield, class of 1856, is credited with first articulating the college ideal as Mark Hopkins on one end of the log and a student on the other. The log and the notion of two people in conversation on such a usually metaphorical log, has been part of Williams' lore and mythos for well over a century. Beyond a very personal metaphor, it's also core to the college's mission statement today, and Williams' approach to a small, residential, liberal arts education. It's about learning, debating ideas, discourse, and dialogue. This is central to Williams, and I'd argue to all education, and more important than ever. Today, we're fortunate to be having this conversation across the stage and auditorium rather than a log. And we'll hear about a new initiative underway tied to the spirit of Mark Hopkins and the log through conversation with two faculty members on how faculty continue to shape the Williams classroom as a place of deep connection, shared inquiry, and intellectual risk-taking. The conversation will explore how close faculty-student relationships, collaborative peer learning, and small discussion-driven environments challenge students and professors to engage fully with complex ideas. We'll talk about how that distinctive academic culture endures, evolves, and ultimately cultivates community where learning is personal, rigorous, and shared. And we'll be doing that with two teacher scholars at Williams and the two individuals leading this initiative of On the Log, Edan Dekel, Chair of Classics and Garfield Professor of Ancient Languages and Chair of the Jewish Studies Program, and Christopher Nugent, the John W. Chandler Professor of Chinese. At the end of the talk, you'll have a chance to ask questions, log your own log experiences, and perhaps share your ideas as we look to bring the log back out to alumni and friends through events and programs, both virtual and in person, in the coming year. So I encourage you all to think about perhaps what the log means to you and those log experiences. For brief logistics, we'll hear from Christopher and Edan. They'll open things up for questions and conversations, and just a brief plug that after this session, we'll be back in this room for the conversation between Professor Mandel and Cappy Hill, class of 76 at 10:30. So please join me in welcoming Edan and Christopher to the stage.
Thanks so much, Ryan, for that kind introduction. We thought we might start out today by just talking a little bit about how the initiative came about, how we thought about the idea of having On the Log be a theme for an entire year. And it really started out on a version of the log. We've had many conversations over 20 years now that we've both been at Williams. And a couple of years ago, we noticed that some of our conversations were about how certain things had been shifting and changing. A lot of it probably as a sort of after effect of COVID. There had been a kind of distancing, obviously some of it quite necessary for a while, but some of those changes had, I think, persisted almost mentally and emotionally for some faculty and students, and some of the closeness and the kind of intellectual intimacy that was important in so many relationships here at Williams had just changed a little bit, and maybe was shifting in a direction that we didn't love. And this was also the period when AI was first kind of coming into awareness, in particular large language models like ChatGPT and their kind of imitations of human language, and the challenges that those pose. And I remember really distinctly seeing an article about how Harvard had created a kind of in-house bespoke chatbot that they were going to use as a teaching assistant for their introductory computer science courses. And I remember my first thought was, that's horrible. and my second thought was not to worry, oh, that's going to happen here, but was actually to realize that's not going to happen here, because that's so opposed to the way we think about what we do here. And so we started talking about some of these things, and we came back again and again to this story of Mark Hopkins and the log.
Yeah, this story of Mark Hopkins and the log, this semi-apocryphal story, right? As the story goes, James Garfield, who was a Civil War general and congressman from Ohio, was attending Society of Alumni dinner at Delmonico's restaurant in Manhattan on December 28th, 1871, and the conversation turned to budget, as it often does at these sorts of things, and what the college might need in terms of facilities and other sorts of resources, and there was vigorous debate among various prominent alumni, and Congressman Garfield got up and said something to the effect of, all we really need is Mark Hopkins on one end of something and a student on the other. He may have said log, he may have said log cabin. Garfield grew up in a log cabin until the age of 18, and so he knew from logs very, very intimately, as opposed to, that poser Abraham Lincoln, who was only in a log cabin for the first 5 years of his life. Garfield's the real log cabin president. And the quote, in whatever form he said it, had an impact immediately. Word got back to campus the very next day. Student publications were writing about it. There was vigorous debate. And then over the next 10 years or so, as folklore has a tendency to do, this sort of transformed itself until after President Garfield's death. It was turned into the pithy version we all know. The ideal college is Mark Hopkins on one end of the log and a student on the other. And that pithy version of it became not only the distinctive calling card for describing a Williams education, but it became the phrase that people in the field of education in general started using to describe what we now call the liberal arts education. If you look at education journals and magazines and op-eds and newspaper articles from 1890, pretty much all the way through the 20th century, you will see this phrase again and again and again appear all over discussions about the difference between a big university education, a trade school education, and something like the liberal arts education. And so for us, having these conversations about why Williams would never succumb to the chatbot TA for computer science, but also thinking about the inevitable distance that had been created between some of us because of COVID and because of other kinds of changes as well in the kind of social landscape, that this was an opportunity to reclaim our quote, right? This is ours. It is of this place. Every other liberal arts college can borrow it and talk about it, but we made it, right? It is about Williams. And yet, in the last 10, 15 years, students don't really know the quote. They haven't heard it very much. It doesn't have the same currency it did in different generations. Fair enough, college lore waxes and wanes with different eras, and that's all to the good, and it's a natural process. But it created an opportunity in our minds to reinvigorate this idea, this mythos, which is really the word for it because it's something that has the power to generate ideas and systems of thought out of a story. And so we wanted to take this mythos and see what would happen if we invited the entire college community to reimagine it for our moment, to reinvigorate it, to play with it, and to think about ways in which it can describe the distinctive aspects, the distinctive features of a Williams education.
And the idea of it as a mythos, I think, really was our way back in. It was clear to us that people weren't hearing the story as much anymore, as Edan just pointed out. And when we talked to some people about why they thought that was, we heard that there was some resistance to the image. And some of that resistance was because certain parts of the college community felt that it excluded them a bit. For example, some staff thought, where are we in this image? We have a teacher and we have a student, but where are we? And to us, we didn't even have to think about it. It was obvious that all of these different parts of the college community are there in this image, especially if you think of it as something larger like a mythos. That log can represent so many different things. We can't have this conversation we're having today in this beautiful theater without all sorts of people who are neither students nor faculty supporting that endeavor. For that matter, students aren't always sitting on one end of a log across from a faculty member specifically. Very, very often, they're sitting across from somebody else who has served as a mentor to them. That could be a coach on their team. It can be their supervisor when they're working in the library or one of the dining halls. It can be an older student who's working with them in a faculty member's lab and has more experience in that lab. So this idea of the mythos is much broader, and it also allows for opposing viewpoints. All mythoses have contradictory elements. That's one of the things that makes them interesting and generative. And so once we kind of had that piece, it felt really natural to start developing it and talking to other people about it and talking to Maud and senior staff about this idea of having a whole year of programming, events, discussions, activities, and so forth around this mythos to really reground it for what we are today and where we're going in the future.
And what that's resulted in is a really wonderful year of activities that range from a whole set of courses that have specifically been put together and compiled as on-the-log courses that engage with the central themes of the initiative, the idea of the local, the face-to-face, conversations that are sometimes difficult but important to have, courses that emphasize that kind of pedagogy, but also that think about the content of it in innovative ways. And in addition to all those courses, there are lectures and performances and exhibitions in the special collections and in the museum, and events ranging from every part of the college that try to embrace the spirit of the log and get people to think about what it means to be in that intimate encounter with another person at a place that is devoted to the idea of meaningful conversation, that education is fundamentally a series of conversations. This idea came out of a conversation or a set of conversations. In a sense, Christopher and I have been having one long conversation for the 20 years that we've worked together here. And that's how we feel about the conversations we have with our students. They start the first time we ever meet them, they never end, right? Those conversations go on long after the students have graduated. And that idea of conversation, we put students in conversation with each other, we put students in conversation with texts and ideas and experiments, and depending on the field, artwork and performance and so forth. And we put them in conversation with themselves too. But all of it requires a belief that conversation is something that you have to have, that you can't reject it, you can't say it's too difficult, we don't have space for it. The log is the space, and Williams is that log. And the way people have embraced this initiative, which is not a top-down initiative, we haven't told anyone what to do, no one in the college administration gave anyone any orders. This has been an invitation to every part of the college, and people have chosen what they want to do with it, and they've generated their own ideas for courses and programs and speakers and events. And it spans not only the people who are currently in the college, but also the wider Williams family of whom you are representatives. That out in the alumni world, that invitation has been extended as well, to participate, to think, to reflect on what it means to be on the log, and hopefully to share some of that wisdom that you've gained from taking the log out into the world, and to give some of that back to the current students and to engage them. Because our students, they sit on the log and they have the enthusiasm and they're so intelligent and they're so creative. But of course, the one thing that by definition they lack is wisdom, because wisdom requires experience. And that experience has to be out in the world. It has to be after you leave Williams. And so the connection to alumni for us was central from the beginning in thinking about this initiative, because of the paradoxical way in which you have to sit on the log, and that is an ephemeral experience. You have to be there, live. There's no replay, there's no tape. If you weren't there, you missed it, and yet everyone who was there logs, in the other sense of the word, a memory of it, an experience of it in their minds, in their hearts, in their bodies, and that memory, that log of the experience, is what you carry out in the world, and it shapes you and it changes you in various ways. And then we're so curious to see what you do with it when you bring it back to us, when you share some of that wisdom.
I know Edan often says to his first-year advisees that the liberal arts are, by definition, about freedom. And that's why this freedom for people to take the initiative their own way in their own directions was so important to us. In ways, freedom can be frightening. You're on a tightrope and you don't have direction about what to go, where to go. You have to come up with your own ideas, but that work of thinking through things yourself instead of being told what to think is so crucial. It's such an important aspect of what it means to be a human being and what it means to change and evolve as a human being. One of the things that we wanted to happen, and very much has been happening, is that the log has gotten people to think about what they do in maybe not entirely a new light, but with a new focus. Because one of the things that's great about the log is it's what we have been doing, and it's what we're going to keep doing, and thinking about it through this mythos really focuses on that. When I think about the kinds of teaching we do here, and this is one of the reasons why I was so confident Williams wasn't going to be building chatbots to take our place, fortunately, is that so much of it is built on variations of this mythos. The most obvious example is tutorials. And tutorials almost perfectly fit that image of a teacher on one end of a log and a student on the other. But what's really crucial about tutorials is the way they change that image. Because the way tutorials actually happen, the teacher is not doing much of the talking and is doing very, very little instructing. Most of what happens in a tutorial is between the two students who are in that pairing. They're the ones that are sitting on that log, facing each other in open and challenging conversation. And by and large, the faculty member is sitting off to the side, interjecting sometimes, actually learning quite a bit, making some observations, but the real intellectual work that's going on there in a tutorial is between those two students. And again, that can be frightening. For many students, a tutorial is the first time they have been asked to compose an essay, whether that's going to be in writing or whether it's going to be orally, without any kind of prompt, without any specific direction, write about this topic, make sure you cover these three things. They don't have that. And that can be frightening. But that process of thinking through texts, thinking through ideas, thinking about how to present these texts and ideas to their student partner who's in the tutorial with them is an invaluable educational experience.
Seminars are also a version of the log that varies the mythos, right? You think to yourself, if it's one-on-one, how can a class of 12, 15, 18 students and a professor be sitting on a log? Well, they're not exactly sitting on one log, they're sitting on a whole set of logs. And maybe it actually harkens back to Garfield, what he probably said, which was something about a log cabin, that what's really important is that you are a community together in a seminar. You are a group of students who have voluntarily, right, because we have very few requirements in the sense of you have to take this particular class, you have voluntarily chosen to enter this little log cabin that is the classroom, and we have beautiful classrooms all over campus, some wood paneled, some a little less woody, but still all metaphoric log cabins. And you sit down and class after class, twice a week, 3 times a week, once a week, depending on the seminar, you build relationships with the other people in that community. In my classes, which are especially focused on different kinds of textual interpretation, I talk about an interpretive community, that we've come together to be a group of interpreters. And not just to interpret the text that was assigned for reading, but to interpret the world through the skills we're learning as interpreters of text, to learn how to interpret each other, how to interpret ourselves. And each one of those acts of interpretation is laying down a log, a connection between two people, two concepts. And so in a sense, you're both in the log cabin by choosing to go to this remote classroom in a remote school in a remote part of Massachusetts, but you're also building your own log cabin when you're in that class. And you're building one with the rest of your classmates, with the rest of the people in the seminar. And so it creates a different version of what Christopher is describing in the tutorials.
Yeah, and one of the great things about these interpretive communities is that they stretch over time. Both of us work primarily, but not solely, with early texts. My work is mostly in early and medieval Chinese texts. And a course that I've taught the last couple of years on Confucian texts, one of the first things I say to the students is, what we're going to do in this class is not sit here and let me tell you about Confucianism and how it changed and developed, but we're going to enter into this interpretive tradition that has existed for literally thousands of years and has stretched across the globe. In early periods, it was primarily in Northeast China, but then it spread to other parts of the Asian landmass. It went to Korea, it went to Japan, it went to Vietnam, and now it has spread literally all over the world. There are different degrees of authority in these interpretive communities, but they change all the time. And in this class, we're entering into that. We're in dialogue with not just the people who wrote these texts or transcribed these ideas in the first place, but with all of the people who have thought about them and who have used them to make meaning in their lives. And in every class, I have people who come to these ideas from very, very different perspectives. I have some who have grown up in households where they have some familiarity with at least who, for example, Confucius is, and what some of these ideas about filial piety and so forth are. I have other students who are coming from an intellectual tradition that's very much grounded in the New Testament, which is a text some of them know really, really well, and that they think about and that they use to create meaning in their own lives. And those texts come into dialogue with each other as well. They say different things, and they say very similar things. But that image of the log is a way to think about those conversations. It doesn't have to be just two people on the other end. It can stretch across a vaster space, and it can stretch across time, and it's going to go into the future. I mean, I make it clear to my students that I want them to have access to these ideas so that they can use them when they're thinking about their own lives. Not only these ideas, but these ideas as a kind of set of different ways of thinking about human existence and their own moral choices, their aesthetic choices, and so forth. And that's really so much of what we do in so many classes.
one of the things we've done for the initiative is have some beautiful carved log benches placed all over campus so that students and faculty and staff and alumni can sit and have a conversation. So if you're wandering around this weekend, there are about 12 of them in all sorts of unexpected places, and so we invite you to sit and enjoy. But when I think about a log bench, it also makes me think of another kind of bench that is a metaphorical log that is central to the Williams education, and that's the lab bench, the lab workstation. What we do in the sciences at Williams is also the essence of the log mythos. The idea of a professor or an older student, as Christopher mentioned in the earlier version of this, working with a student who is new to the lab, who is coming and learning how to use the techniques of the particular science, and then over time, deepening that knowledge, deepening that experience, making discoveries, learning how to interpret those discoveries, bridging all the different sorts of skills that we've been talking about. That happens across that lab bench. And that is a log, and it functions in the same way that we're talking about. And it's a log that especially, I think, emphasizes another key feature of what's distinctive about the way we think about education and teaching at Williams, and that is the importance of time. You need a lot of time to interpret and to think and to sort ideas out. And when you're running an experiment, some of those experiments take hours, days, weeks to run, and you have to go back and you have to tend to it again and again and again. And over that time, you're not just sitting around waiting, you're having conversation, you're thinking, you're planning other moves. And having that time, which is a function of the work you're doing, then becomes an opportunity to revel in that time, to enjoy the expanse of thinking and time spent reflecting on the different sorts of things that you're doing. When else will you ever have as much time to think as when you're at Williams, right? Almost never in your life. And it's such an extraordinary gift that we have. And that our students are able to take advantage of. As I keep telling my students every year, and I, like Christopher, I also teach early literature, though in the Western tradition, Hebrew Bible and the Greek and Roman classics, foundational texts. But I keep telling students that what I'm working toward, and I'm only half joking when I say this, what I'm working toward is one day teaching a class where we read one sentence, and we just keep rereading that one sentence for 12 weeks. Over the years, I've pared down my readings so that we're really working with things that we can linger over for 75 minutes in a class session, day after day after day. And that process of spending time on something, especially in a world that is increasingly interested in speed of various sorts, to push back against that a little bit when you're learning, right? It's not to say that speed is bad or efficiency is bad. The world needs those things. But in order to know how to use those things and how to make those things meaningful to living a human life, you have to have some deep experience with slowness, with that patience of working over something small over a long period of time. And that's something that Williams does particularly well because we have these structures, whether it's a lab, whether it's a tutorial, whether it's the kind of seminar that I've been talking about as well.
And science is both collaborative and, in its way, antagonistic. You're working together, building on each other's knowledge. If you're in a lab with other people, you're working together with them in that lab. If you're thinking about other scientists working in a similar field or the same field, you're working together towards discoveries. But a crucial part of that practice is also constantly questioning your own work, other people's work. Can we reproduce this? Is this finding legitimate? And to create the kind of context in which both of those things can happen to their fullest, most rewarding extent is wonderful. And it's one of the things that a place like Williams allows. And that image actually carries through for so many other log-like activities that we do here. Edan and I had some conversations about the role of athletics in a liberal arts education at a place like Williams. One of the great things about Div 3 athletics is that you go out onto a field with a set of rules and you compete as hard as you can against each other for a set period of time, and then you're done and you shake hands and you revel in that relationship as athletes who were opposed but are working together to make this larger thing, the game, the match, and so forth. To say nothing of the relationships you develop on your team as well. A lot of our teams have that collaboration and antagonism built into them. If you're on a team like a tennis team or a squash team, you're both competing against each other for where you're going to be in the lineup, but then you're absolutely supporting each other when you go into competition against other teams. So that give and take, that back and forth, that having a sense of some larger thing that contains both these aspects of intellectual experience, physical, athletic experience is all part of the log. And these are a lot of these things that I don't go around thinking about every day, but thinking about what we do here through the mythos of the log is what revealed them to me. And it influences the way I conduct my classes as well. And that's been really great. And these ideas, of course, extend to other types of teaching and learning that we do here. Not only is the lab the log, the athletic field the log, but the art studio is the log. And again, you have this one-on-one experience of a teacher critiquing your work, guiding you through ways to make it better, challenging you but working with you, and also all of your classmates doing the same thing. That's the essence of studio art classes, theater classes, creative writing classes. That give and take when you're critical, but critical in a way that's always aiming at improving each other, is something that stretches across the college.
I think that actually connects what we've been talking about to one of the central issues that educators are facing in the world right now, which is, of course, the rise of large language model, artificial intelligence, the chat GPTs of the world, which you can't open a newspaper without seeing some story about it almost every week, if not every day. And we had started talking about this idea of reinvigorating the mythos of the log right around the time the first large language models became publicly available. And we already had a sense that that was going to be something people would want to engage with and think about because it gets to the very heart of what kind of education we're offering. But as we've seen those things develop, Christopher and I in our conversations, and certainly with many of our colleagues, are more and more sure that we've got this right? That Williams knows what it's doing, and that our brand of education, which is a brand of education that emphasizes that face-to-face encounter, that experience with a fellow human being, and then multiple relationships with human beings, that's the right way to approach this, because these large language models are quite bad at disagreeing with you in a productive way. They're quite bad at offering the kind of criticism that Christopher was talking about. If you want to have a principled discussion across difference with somebody, you need another human being for that, because the machine isn't able to do it, because it's not human, right? And so it does not have the emotional response that fills those kinds of discussions with so much charge, but also so much potential. One of the things we really wanted for this year, and we haven't ruled it out yet, it may still be coming, in addition to these log benches, we had this vision of log seesaws all over campus, teeter-totters. Why did we want a seesaw? Because a seesaw is the perfect model of productive disagreement, which is to say that you cannot have fun on a seesaw by yourself. Right? The other person has to participate with you. They have to engage. If they're mad at you and saying, I'm not going to go, think back to your own siblings or playground friends, you know what happens. One's up there and one's down there, and neither is having any fun. To have the fun, you have to put aside the differences long enough to balance each other and to give each other a push one way or the other. And then you can get into it, and you can disagree, and you can yell at each other, and you can have all of these interesting conversations across your differences, but you're doing it with an understanding that you're still participating in a shared activity and that you both are going to get something out of that. And I think that is what I've seen again and again and again in the Williams classroom and on the playing fields and in the dining halls and in passing in conversation that makes me so sure that we've got this, that we're not in danger of being swallowed up by AI or having our whole model being replaced. This is what students want, this is what our faculty wants, this is what everyone associated with Williams wants, to have that conversation on some version of that log seesaw.
And that's part of the reason why our own response to the large language models has not been simply to say, bad, 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 don't use these no matter what. In fact, what it has been is to assert the value of what we've been doing, to assert the value of, as Edan said, spending time on texts, spending time on problems, spending time on conversations. Large language models try to remove that time, to take it away from the human and to put it into a processing algorithm. And that takes away something of what we are as people. And the way you assert that is you put students in contexts in which they see the value in it. And that's what happens in our classroom. They see the value in spending hours on a single sentence because we ask them to do it, and they have that experience, and they realize the value of it. They realize how they're changed intellectually. They realize the satisfaction they feel after that. They realize the joy of having a sudden insight about something that they'd been thinking about for hours and hours and hours and assumed they couldn't think about anymore and would never come up with a new idea about. Then suddenly they come up with that new idea. The machine doesn't come up with it, they come up with it. That conversation with another human being where both people change, where both people come to new insights. And you don't have to convince them of it by saying, this is bad, this is good. You just let them do that thing, and then they realize how wonderful it is. And that goes for everything from having these conversations to writing out their thoughts by hand on a piece of paper with a pencil or a pen.
And this is also why ultimately, Christopher and I certainly, and I think the college as a whole, never feels like we have to be defensive about what we do, right? Because when you're defensive, you're already granting somebody else's premise. And we don't need to grant anybody else's premise because we've got our own premise, and it's the log, right? That's our premise. It's homegrown. We know what it is. We know what we're doing. And so as Christopher says, we demonstrate it every day in the classroom, outside of the classroom, to our students. And the ones who want to embrace it will embrace it. And even the ones that maybe are resistant at first, because they are surrounded by it, they come to see it as another way of engaging with the world. And so we don't have to fight off AI or fight off distance learning or any of these other sorts of things, because what we're doing is just presenting the alternative and letting people revel in that and enjoy it and experience it and see for themselves how it transforms them, what kind of person it makes them. Because it puts the human at the center of the education in a way that some of these techniques do not. And there are all sorts of reasons why you might not want to center the human in various kinds of activities in the world, but an education is fundamentally about transforming a human being. And so our way of doing it is an assertion of the value of that, and we demonstrate it over and over again in everything that we do. And we also, by demonstrating it, we also make the case to the world. And this is another important aspect, is that Williams leads by example. It shows people what a Williams education can produce, what kind of human being in the world doing all the great things that our alumni do, that is the demonstration of the value of the education. Because you can't see it on the inside unless you're on the inside. And so we can describe it to people out there, we can talk about the log, we can give them examples, we can write up tutorials, show them our students' work, but it's not the same thing as actually having sat on that log for 4 years and experienced that and then taken that out into the world. And yet, those of you that have done that, you then become the ambassadors for that idea because you carry that log out there.
And as much as the log is ours and is fundamentally about this place from which it sprang, we are thrilled to see the idea out there in the world. We are thrilled to see other schools take up the image if they want to. We don't have to defend it. We've already got it. But we think it has great value, and we think it's a way for the country, for the world to think about this mode of learning, this mode of changing yourself intellectually and as a human everywhere. And so it's wonderful. I'm thrilled to see Maud quoted in local papers talking about the little log that she holds in her hand. So I've cut logs I have one here, I try to keep one with me a lot. Little logs that all of the seniors this year at Convocation got to help them think about the image, think about what the mythos means to me. All of the faculty members at Williams, or at least the ones who have shown up to faculty meetings, also have their own little logs. And it's just a nice thing to have sitting out here, to look at, to fiddle with, to think about these values that are so important to what we do in the past, in the present, and we very much hope and believe in the future as well.
Yeah, and I think that's actually, we'd love to open it up to questions and thoughts that you have on that beautiful note that Christopher ended with. So we have people passing microphones.
Sounds like a great idea. No, and I'm sure it's very good in practice. Winter study, where you have the time to do different things. What is the faculty going to do with this over winter study when you have more time to sit on the log? You don't have a specific course outline to get through.
So there are a range of things. I mean, as you know, winter study has been changing somewhat in terms of the faculty role. Some of that change was recent, but a lot of it has been taking place over time. There's been a shift in winter studies since I've been here, certainly, towards more and more experiential models. So not as much a kind of concentrated version of maybe what would be a regular Williams course, but things that deal more with types of experiential learning. But my sense is that faculty are still going to be deeply involved in many aspects of Williams, of winter study at Williams. One is a number of them are just still teaching courses because they love teaching those courses. They love having that experience with students where grades are not an issue, where you have classes that regularly meet for 3 hours, where there's hands-on work with a faculty member who may not be doing hands-on work in their regular classes. They're not teaching in a physics lab. They're an English professor, a history professor, who also happens to be really good at this other thing and wants to share that with students. So that's continuing. Another thing is more and more students are doing 99s, which are independent studies, and all of those independent studies are done with faculty members. And there are different models there. Sometimes the students are going away, and that exchange with the faculty member is happening through email, on the phone, and so forth. But the real experience is with the people that they're meeting wherever they are, and the reflection is happening with the faculty member. But some of them, they're working closely with a faculty member on campus, and they're meeting every week, sometimes multiple times a week, to talk about their project, but the rest of that time is their independent work. Then, of course, theses are continuing, as always, and a lot of thesis work for students who are doing theses takes place during winter study. Obviously, for students who are in the sciences, that's taking place primarily in the lab in an even more focused and concentrated way because they have that time. And our colleagues in the sciences put in a tremendous amount of time in those labs with students, especially during winter study. And this is a time where they're trying to do their own work as well, but they spend a lot of time with those students. And for those of us who are in more text-based fields, we're meeting with students, and especially over winter study, working on their writing with them, because it's a time where they have those expanses of time to really focus on this one thing that they're doing. You can't do that in the same way in a semester. And I have found with my students who are working on theses over winter study, and actually thinking back into the very distant past, my own experience writing a thesis, the school where I was an undergraduate did not have winter study, but did have a long winter break, and so many of us who were writing theses would just spend hours and hours and hours in the library. And so I think all of these things are still going on, and in some contexts it's even more concentrated than it was under the old winter study model.
I would also say, take a look at the course listings if you're curious for this year's winter study. They're really quite extraordinary. It's probably the strongest set I've seen in 15 years. It's really reinvigorated winter study to think about ways of bringing in alumni especially to teach different kinds of courses and to have faculty teaching courses they're excited about. The travel courses are amazing, all the different sorts of experiential things, and then all the things that Christopher mentioned as well. I know very few faculty who don't work with at least 3 or 4 students every winter, regardless of whether they were obligated to teach a winter study that year or not. I haven't had a formal winter study obligation for almost 20 years because of my different administrative responsibilities, and yet there's not a winter where I don't work with at least 7 or 8 students in one capacity or another, independent studies, theses, those casual conversations about things that there weren't time to talk about when we were in the regular semester. I had a student just the other day come to me and say, this winter, I just want to sit down, can we meet once a week and just read this text together? And I said, sure, let's do it, right? We'll just find a couple hours and we'll do that. Not a winter study course, not an independent study, just something someone wants to do. And faculty, I think, actually will have more time to do that with the new system. And I'm really looking forward to seeing the results of that.
Yep.
Thank you for a very interesting talk. You have made the point time and time again that it takes time for this whole log process to work. The parents of our students expect their education to lead to immediate and hopefully lucrative employment in the real world. And in the real world, there is no time. There's no time for anything except getting on with the job. Can you explain how you deal with parents who expect that kind of result from the education their children have received in a world in which time is immediate?
And could you repeat the question, just so everyone can hear it? We
So
have a number of folks that need
the question
need the mic.
is, Edan and I talk a lot about the importance of taking time, that the log experience is built on the freedom to take those long periods of time to work through problems, to work with other students, faculty, and so forth, thinking through these questions. But the real world doesn't owe the real world. The post-Williams corporate employment world has a different relationship with time and efficiency, let's say, from what we have in our classrooms. And parents of students who are going here, who in most cases are paying a lot of money for the experience they're going to have here, want their children to go on to satisfying and, in many cases, lucrative careers in which that time is not emphasized. So what do we say to them if they're concerned about that question? I guess one of the things I would say is that's why you send them here first, right? Because then they get the opportunity to spend that time when they're here. Most people are not going to go on into careers in academia like we did, and we're very, very aware of that. But we think it's crucial to give them that space here to do that intellectual work that's going to do a couple of things. One, it's going to give them the basis to use, the basis in problem solving, the basis in thinking through different sorts of dilemmas, thinking about what matters to them as a person living in the world with other people. Give them the space to think about that here so they can take those kinds of evolving insights out into the world that they're going to go into that's going to have different values in terms of time spent from what we have here. The other is also to show them the value of that time. So maybe when they go out into that world and increasingly find themselves in positions of power and influence, so that they can assert the fact that in many, many contexts, efficiency may not be the most important thing. I just read a wonderful book by a British author who won the Booker Prize for this book, and it's called Orbital or Orbit, I don't remember, but it's just about a fictional account of astronauts on the International Space Station. And one of the sayings that they go back to again and again when they're doing work on that space station, surrounded by the vacuum of space where any mistake can result in all of them dying, is slow is fast. Slow is fast. If you do things carefully, then you're doing them as fast as you can with the correct result. And that's kind of what I would see as that kind of interface between what we're doing here and what students are going to be doing when they go out into the post-Williams world.
Christopher said it beautifully. Phil, I would just add one thing, which is I would start by denying the premise, which is to say that I don't actually believe that parents all think the way you characterized it. I think that parents want their children to thrive, and that they are actually much more broad-minded about that than we sometimes give them credit for. And that it's at our peril if we assume that they all want one thing for their students when they come out of a college, and especially when they come out of Williams. So I would start there, but then I would also build on what Christopher just said. In my home department, the classics department, our department motto, which we have on our department seal, both in Latin and in Greek, is a famous proverb that goes all the way back to probably the 6th century BC, and it translates as, make haste slowly, right? Make haste slowly. And that is what we strive to do, right? To teach them to make haste slowly, right? You have to have forward progress, right? But you have to be able to do that slowly. You have to learn how to figure out where speed is required, where efficiency is required. You have to learn to be able to tell the difference between something authentic and something manufactured or illusory. And that's what making haste slowly ultimately means. And then the other thing I will just add, if you'll permit me to be a Latin teacher for just one moment, is that in the Latin language, in the world of the Romans, you had two words that are connected to each other. One is the word we translate as work or business, and the other is the word we translate as leisure. And those words are, the leisure word is otium in Latin, and the business word is negotium, which is to say not leisure. So what that means is that the unmarked category is leisure, right? Not work. And so when we assume that the world works a certain way and that it's driven by these principles, that is not necessarily something inherent in the fabric of the universe. That is a cultural choice. That's something that develops in time and space and can change over time and space. And one of the things we try to do at Williams, I think, is to get students to expand their horizons and see that there are different frameworks that they can apply to the world. And that even if they have to interact with the world they're living in, they can bring other sorts of thought processes, other frameworks to bear on the project of living the best life they can live in the world that they have to live in.
You all have described an initiative overflowing with activities and how-tos, and I certainly congratulate you on being the owner-entrepreneurs of this initiative. My question is, what are the most valuable results that you expect to accomplish as a result of this initiative? What is the new value for Williams College that you expect and aspire to create?
I think to some extent, the new value just isn't new. It's the value, the set of values that we've had here for centuries, and what we want people to do is think about them in their new contexts and the context they're going to face going forward. And that does not mean a type of conservatism that says that these values can never change, can never shift, have to remain frozen in amber, but rather that we have the belief that they're strong enough, they're flexible enough, they contain so much within this mythos that people can apply them to lots of different situations. And so what we want in terms of a result is people to think about these things in their own ways. Think about what aspects of this mythos have value to them, why those aspects have value to them, and how they can embody those values and carry them out in what they do here and what they do after here. For many of us, there probably will not be an after here. We will be here until we're across from the tennis courts over there. But most of the students we work with, of course, will be in other places. And if this gets them to think about what matters to them about this place and what we do here, then we'll be thrilled.
Yeah, I think that that's exactly right. And one of the ways in which we've tried to embody that is precisely by not being the sort of owners of the initiative. And entrepreneurs, maybe to a certain extent, but this is not an initiative in the normal sense of here is something additional that we're adding to the college and that costs all sorts of extra money. In fact, this costs no extra money because what we've asked people to do, we have no budget for this initiative. We've asked people to redirect some of what they would normally spend money on this year towards ways of linking to the initiative if they're interested in doing so. And so every single thing that's being done is happening as part of the regular flow of that particular part of the college, but it has this thematic center, this opportunity to engage. And so it is an initiative, right, in that we're trying to coalesce around something, but it is not meant to be something that is sort of tacked on or imposed or thrust upon people, because it's really about reawakening something that has always been here and that is embodied in what people do, but that they don't always have a vocabulary for articulating. There are a lot of faculty members who have started here in that last 10, 15 years that I was talking about, where no one talks about the log, where we haven't had a collective vocabulary for thinking about what's distinctive about a Williams education, and so people fall back on generalizations about the liberal arts. But those are not distinctive enough, because not all liberal arts institutions put the same kind of emphases on the conversations that we put at Williams. There are similarities between Williams and some of our fellow schools, but we have distinctive features. And to be able to have a vocabulary and imagery to talk about that is a way also to get faculty who are newer. We've had a lot of staff turnover in the last 5, 6 years, since COVID especially, to get people to reorient themselves to the place, to have a link to the historical, but also to always be thinking about the present, and as Christopher said, especially about the future of the institution.
We have time for 2 quick questions.
The benefits that you've outlined of the interpersonal context and back and forth is just phenomenal. Do you think it's possible to do that in a Zoom environment?
I think that it is that there is a barrier that comes up with something like Zoom that makes that more complicated. It doesn't make it impossible. I know people who, my daughter who started middle school on Zoom because it was her 7th grade year, was that first big COVID year. There were aspects about that she liked. But part of that may have been because she was a little afraid of the face-to-face personal contact. And I think that's one of the risks with Zoom, is that it reduces a certain type of friction. And this gets back to some extent to the problems with the large language models, is they reduce friction where that friction is part of the point. Part of the value in writing for yourself is that it's hard. It's hard in ways that are sometimes unpleasant, but that's how your mind changes. With face-to-face conversation, it's the same kind of thing. Being in a room with somebody, sitting across with somebody, from somebody, produces, in some cases, feelings of friction. It can be a little awkward. It's hard to look somebody else directly in the eyes and talk to them. But they're another person, sharing that space with you, learning while you're learning. That's not completely absent on Zoom, but it's kind of a simulacrum of that real human experience. There are contexts in which Zoom is better than nothing, but I don't think it's ever better than that face-to-face conversation.
Yeah, I mean, you said it perfectly. Friction, right? Look at this log. This log is bumpy. This log is rough, right? You need something that is a little bit uncomfortable in order to activate some of that conversation, especially if you're dealing with students, some of whom might feel a little bit nervous about getting in there and participating in those ways. You put them on Zoom, it makes it harder. Not impossible, but harder. And why make it harder when we have a wonderful place for them to come and sit on a log together, right? We have this campus. There's no need for them to be sitting in a dorm room on Zoom or away. We had that need for COVID, but as soon as we could get them back here, we got them back here. And some people may have thought, well, was that risky or whatever? But it worked, right? Because people getting back here were able to reinvigorate the place, get back to what we do, which is sitting on that log and having those conversations.
You both have been on the Williams faculty for 20 years. And my question is, have you seen a change in the students in terms of their mental health? And I have this horrifying picture, it was on television, of an Ivy League graduate sneaking up behind an insurance company executive and and assassinating him. And does your program have anything to do with dealing with impatience and anger management?
I think that, well, first of all, we're obviously not mental health professionals. I think there's no question statistically that students are facing a different set of mental health challenges now and in recent years that are different from what they were facing when we both started. We both started as faculty before social media. We started as faculty before smartphones. And again, I'm not a mental health professional. I'm not going to make the connections between those things, though the correlations seem pretty clear in many cases. But I think what we do is by focusing on our mutual humanity in the intellectual context in which we engage with students, we help them think about themselves and everybody else around them as human beings who have, in some cases, different ideas, who have different challenges, but often have the same challenges, and challenges that they can face together. Somebody who has whatever going on in their mind that's going to lead them to do what that young man did, may be by itself beyond the intervention of talking with people about the log and having them sit face to face. But I'm confident that the kind of things we do here are in support of recognizing people's fellow humanity and having empathy for them as individuals and part of this shared collective endeavor. And I hope that makes a difference to as many of our students and our fellow faculty members and our staff colleagues as possible.
And again, right, we can take them through the first part of the journey, right? This is a place of learning and a place of study. But for that wisdom to come, right, that wisdom, you have to have the experience out in the world beyond here as well. And so it's only the beginning, right? We give them a set of tools and a way of thinking about the world, and we expose them to things that they've never seen before, but we only have them for 4 years, and then they have to go out and they have to make their way in the world and gain that wisdom, and we hope that what we're offering contributes in some substantive way to that wisdom, and we believe that. But it comes back to what Christopher has emphasized and I emphasized again and again. It's because we believe in putting that shared humanity at the center of the educational project. I think we're out of time. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much.